Welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, hi, hello, welcome. I am Sherrilyn and I'm so glad you found me. Thank you for joining me every single upload. What do I say? Why does it feel like I haven't done this for 9,000 years? I don't know. Thanks for being here, okay? I love you. Today we have another Susie feature. She wants to start by giving a shout out and a thank you to Ricky, who brought this case to her attention, and I would like to thank you both and all of you for being here. Today we are talking about the case of Veronica Blumhorst, who was a 21-year-old who literally vanished out of thin air after seemingly making it home from her work shift. So her car was parked safely in the family garage. Everything looked perfectly normal except for one thing. Veronica was gone. There was no signs of a struggle, no witnesses, and no trace of Veronica. And the people closest to her, including some of the police officers that were tasked with finding her, would soon become the center of a decades-long mystery that still haunts Mendota to this day. Veronica Jill Blumhorst was born September 4th, 1969 to Mary Gambardella, who put her up for adoption. And at 7 months old, the Blumhorsts adopted her, bringing her home to join their family, which at the time consisted of parents Paul and Betty and their other adopted daughter, Sherrilyn. Sherrilyn shared a really cute story that when Veronica was adopted, they were going to pick her up, and Paul and Betty had asked her, what should we name the new baby? And inspired by the Archie comics, Sherrilyn suggested Veronica because she felt that Betty and Veronica should always be together.
It was kind of like, I think I was her hero to some extent. You know how older sisters are to younger siblings. Used to drive me crazy at the time, but she always did a lot of things that were kind of supportive to me that always kind of made me feel bad later for like resenting or, being this pesty little sister, because she'd do something really awesome further down the road. So we had a pretty good life. I mean, she had some learning disabilities.
Now, 5 years after Veronica's adoption, Betty became pregnant with their third child, a son, Todd. In an interview with the Vanish podcast, Sherrilyn reminisced about them all growing up in rural Illinois. The Blumhorst family had lived in several small towns, including Dover and Malden, before they settled into what they considered, quote, the big city of Mendota, where Paul worked as a firefighter and Betty worked in a nursing home. In 1990, Mendota, Illinois was a small, close-knit Midwestern town with a population of around 7,000 people. But I just did think that was really adorable reading where they were like, we're moving to the big city from like the other towns that they were in.
We grew up in small towns. We lived like in Dover and then Malden, Illinois, just down the street from where my cousins we were actually lived on the same street they lived on for like a few years. So we were like out on a farm, and then we moved into Mendota and had to get used to city life. So we were, just a couple of country girls who were used to playing with chickens and dogs and everything, and then moving into the big city of Mendota.
They had a large extended family, many of whom lived in or near Mendota as well, and Veronica was very close with her siblings and her cousins. Kind of sounds like it was all just kind of like this one big family. Well, I guess they are family. You know what I mean. Where you grow up feeling like siblings. Susie actually spoke to Veronica's cousin Tanya on Facebook after the two of them had connected through the Remembering Veronica Blumhorst group on Facebook, and she told Susie, Veronica and I were more than cousins. We were friends. I have so many memories with her, and I always wonder what she'd be like today. She also verified with Susie that Veronica always knew about her adoption. She said that Veronica was adopted, and she and her cousin talked about all of the feelings that adoption brings up, and her cousin Tanya actually ended up adopting 8 children, and she says she sees Veronica's fingerprints on that journey. They also have open adoptions because Veronica had wondered who her birth mom was, and she wanted, her children growing up knowing their birth families. And that was all because of her cousin Veronica. At 21 years old, Veronica, often affectionately called Toothpick by her family, had blonde, wavy hair, green eyes, and true to her nickname, was small. She stood at only 5 feet tall and weighed about 100 pounds. She had a recently new boyfriend of a few months, a loving family, and a really good job that she loved at the Super Valu. Her primary job there was working like the VHS rental counter, the movie counter. She sometimes worked cashier, but according to her cousin Tanya, handling money had made her nervous and fully relatable. Tanya and other members of Veronica's family that Susie had seen like in interviews and stuff had said that learning was kind of like difficult for Veronica. So something like that would, kind of like get her nervous and like overwhelmed if there was like people hovering over her. And I find that so relatable. I wouldn't say like all learning was really difficult for me, but like now understanding more of like ADHD, I'm like, okay, there were definitely subjects where if I just could not grasp it or understand even just like a course, or what do we call it, course or like module within a topic that I just could not grasp or find any interest in, I found that so difficult. But then I would like excel in things that did interest me. I don't know. When I read that, I was like, that seems like super relatable. And when anything comes to like math or numbers, and then you're like, you have people observing you try to count that out. Yeah, I agree. Can very much relate with Veronica with that. Now, on September 19th, 1990, Veronica was working the night shift at the Dempsey Super Valu, and this was the first time in weeks that she had actually been to work. She had taken off some time due to having mono, and Susie had inserted a little note for me. In the notes here, she said that she had mono once and that it sucked, and she says, if you haven't had it, for reference, symptoms include fatigue, fever, sore throat, and swollen lymph nodes. While most people recover within 2 to 4 weeks, some people may experience symptoms for up to 6 months. She says she fell into the latter category, battling primarily fatigue for nearly 6 months. And I've never had mono, but then reading Susie's experience with it, it brought me to Romy and Michelle's high school reunion. You guys have to let me know if your brain went there as well. But remember when she was like talking about, like, she's like, oh yeah, like she had lost so much weight. She had like fatigue and like couldn't get out of bed, and then was excited for having mono. Anyways, so besides the point, but a little 90s reference for you. Before leaving her shift that night, Veronica ended up renting the Bette Midler movie Stella, and then told her coworkers that she was going to watch it the next day because she was still, feeling the effects of mono and just, wiped out, especially I can imagine like coming back from having time off and then working like that first shift back. I mean, even if you just have like regular vacation time, your first shift back is kind of like a nightmare. So she was like, I'm so tired, I'm just gonna go home and go to bed, but planned on watching that movie the next day. She clocked out around 1 a.m. and then was last seen walking to her car. Her car was a blue 1989 Chevrolet Corsica. I have to ask my parents what year their Corsica was, but we did have a blue Corsica. So there's a lot of, relatability here with Veronica. I felt like even more close to her than a lot of cases. The last person who saw her walking to her car was her coworker Sharon, and so this was at like 1:07 a.m., meaning that this was like going now into September 20th, 1990. Obviously, like she started her shift on September 19th, but if you like see like the dates or whatever, that's why, because it turned into midnight the next day. Why am I over talking so much today? I don't know. I'm sorry. Now, the Super Valu that she worked at was less than half a mile from her home, so the drive would have only taken a couple minutes at most. And Veronica's mother, Betty, remembers waking up around 11:30 p.m. that night, and she had gone to the kitchen to get a glass of water. When she went to the kitchen, she had peeked outside and noticed that the light in the detached garage, which was like approximately 30 feet from the house, was still on. And to that, it indicated that Veronica was not home yet. So according to the website set up by Veronica's brother Todd after she disappeared, he said that there was a system within the family to, let each other know whether somebody had gotten home safely. The garage light was left on until the last person got home and turned it off as they closed up the garage and then, walked this short distance back to the house. So Betty had gone back to bed. She then woke up again around 2:30 a.m. and this time she noticed that the garage door was closed, the light was off, and she could see the back end of Veronica's car through the window. So she went to bed just assuming that Veronica had made it home safe and sound. It wasn't until the next morning when Veronica's 16-year-old brother Todd went to go wake her up to take him to school, which was something that they had previously arranged because he was having car troubles, that the family realized Veronica wasn't home. She wasn't in her bedroom. So Todd called their father, who initially thought maybe Veronica had forgotten that she'd agreed to take Todd to school, and maybe her boyfriend Jeff had just come to pick her up for like a little early morning breakfast date or something and wasn't too worried about it. So when Paul got home, Veronica still wasn't home, but he's not thinking the worst. He's still thinking, she's probably still out with her boyfriend Jeff. Keep in mind, Veronica is 21 years old. This is also the 90s. This is 1990, like right fresh in the 90s. We are not easily accessible then, or we weren't easily accessible then. And when you couldn't get a hold of people, it wasn't like the instant feeling, like this, sinking feeling that something was wrong. There would be times where you wouldn't cross paths within the house for a day or so, and you just wouldn't really think anything of it. It wasn't until he received a call from Veronica's doctor's office about her missing an appointment that he knew that she was looking forward to going to, that he started to feel uneasy since she was usually reliable. He became even more concerned when he got another call looking for Veronica, and this time it was from her boyfriend Jeff, who Paul had assumed she was with all day. Before going into full panic mode though, Paul thought maybe Veronica had gone to her sister Carolyn's house, who at this time had already moved out to live on her own but lived close by. So Paul knew Veronica had plans to spend some time with her sister and look at wedding dresses. So he drove over to Carolyn's, but when he got there to see if Veronica was there, he found out she wasn't there either. At this point, there is, panic setting, and Carolyn decides to go back to the family house with her dad at approximately 11 a.m. And when they got back, Veronica's boyfriend Jeff and a Mendota police investigator named John Peckinham, who actually happened to live in the house behind the Blumhorst family, was at the house waiting for them. Jeff had apparently contacted law enforcement to report that Veronica was missing. Betty was also called home from work shortly after, and then so was Veronica's brother Todd from school. So at this point, everyone is kind of just meeting up and congregating at the house. And something to note before getting into the investigation is that the Monday night before Veronica disappeared, there was an opening for police chief in Mendota, and 2 officers were vying for this position. One of them was a man named Kenneth Hahn, and the other was John Peckinham, who happened to be, the back neighbor and who was there with Jeff when the rest of the family arrived at the house. At the time that Veronica was reported missing, Kenneth Hahn was named as the interim chief of police, and John Peckinham was placed as the lead investigator of her disappearance case. Now, Veronica's father has felt that both men believed that if they were the one to solve her disappearance, they would be, officially appointed as the chief of police. And it seemed from, the personal experience that the family was feeling, the focus was more on that title and kind of, I guess, gatekeeping, if you will, withholding information, as opposed to actually solving the crime and working all together. Now, from the get-go, we have some issues right when the investigation starts. Okay, so according to the police report that was filed by Officer John Peckinham, the report says, "We checked the entire house and came up with nothing. I then checked her auto, which was parked in the east side of the garage. The unit had the doors locked except for the right rear passenger door, which was not locked. There were items in the back seat, a green travel bag which contained clothes, and a plastic shopping bag which was on the floor behind the front passenger seat. It also contained clothes. The trunk was checked and nothing was out of place." The report went on to say there was no sign of a struggle in the auto or in the garage. Outside, there was no sign of a struggle or any items laying around on the ground. So notably, her purse, keys, and the red work smock, as well as the VHS tape that she had rented prior to leaving work that evening, was all missing. So indicating that she had removed them from the vehicle when she got out and left the garage. They were all missing with Veronica. Now, what the family says the report conveniently leaves out is that it wasn't even the officer who checked the trunk. So there was mention that it was checked. But they felt that from the get-go, there were things that were overlooked because it was actually Veronica's sister, Sherrilyn, who did that when they realized the police hadn't. So when they're seeing searches going on and things being looked at, it was just for me, from seeing so many true crime cases, I feel like the trunk is one of those things that you don't overlook. It's what's in the trunk. They didn't look. It was Sherrilyn who had looked.
And I recall going out to the garage, my parents' garage, and seeing our car sitting there, and just kind of going, well, did anybody open the trunk? And we opened the trunk, and there was, her bag was there from the weekend prior, and that's all that we did. And we shut the trunk, and then we went back in the house.
Apparently, later on that day, there was the canine unit that was brought in to kind of do a scent search. And they did pick up Veronica's scent from the garage. And they actually followed it to the alley that was nearby, but then all of a sudden lost it, which led them to believe that there possibly could have been somebody in the alley in a vehicle that called over to Veronica. The thing that her family feel, though, if this was the case, would be that it wouldn't have been a random person. It would have had to have been somebody that Veronica knew and trusted very much, because she was a cautious person. She would not just go over and talk to somebody who's calling her from an alley at 1 o'clock in the morning. And we'll get into that in a little bit later in the video. This is where the case to me, or I guess the investigation to me, gets quite frustrating. I mean, already the whole trunk thing, I'm just come on, you're vying for the position of the chief of police and we're not going to check the trunk. What are we doing, John? What are we doing? He was also tasked, obviously, with interviewing people in Veronica's life. He interviewed, coworkers, even some of the Super Valu customers and friends, but no leads, had substantiated out of that. He also obviously interviews the boyfriend. That's probably the first person that anybody would have wanted to talk to. And Jeff is described as, we'll lay out the foundation here of Jeff, okay? So Jeff is described as smart, but a bit quirky. So for Susie, speaking to Veronica's cousin Tanya, she said that she got the feeling from the few times that she had met Jeff that they were a good fit. They were on each other's level. They were good for one another because they could take care of each other, and they both knew what it was like to have difficulties understanding or different picking up perceptions and stuff like that. This is a Susie quote here. She said, "Personally, I get autism spectrum vibe," but without speaking to Jeff directly, she's not going to say one way or the other if that's accurate. And then she goes on to say that she had spoken to other people who did personally know Jeff, and they also agreed kind of with that feeling, just the way that it's being described. Again, we've got to go back to, this is 1990. It's so interesting, kind of trying to put yourself back into that time, time frame. Yeah. Bring yourself back. I think that it wasn't that long ago, but 1990 was a long time ago. It's been a long time, but we've also come such a long way with things like this, with learning abilities. Now you were just so written off if you just didn't understand how, standard society did. So even just with Veronica being, described as having some difficulties and stuff like that. And then also Jeff being, quirky, but then being able to understand each other. That makes so much sense because you could, this was the time where you just shoved your kid full of Ritalin if there was if they were a little bit fidgety. We didn't have different layers or spectrums of things like autism or even ADHD. It was just such a wild time. I mean, even think of the LGBTQ plus community. We have come so far. Mental health. I could go on forever. But anyways, I thought it was worth knowing because it makes sense. Also, when we get into it now, I promise I will get to my points here. Sorry, you guys. It makes sense, some of the things that Jeff said in his interview.
He was your proverbial guy who is really, really smart, but he never really fit in anywhere in high school and stuff like that. And he had a really quirky sense of humor. And so, he was a guy who wasn't really comfortable in a lot of social situations with regular type of people who talked about sports and, all this other stuff, because he just had a different mindset and different interests.
By all accounts, Jeff and Veronica had a really good relationship. Like I said earlier, it was relatively new. That had been dating for about 5 months, but the two of them seemed to be very happy and planning for the long haul together, and had even talked about marriage. So in the interview that Jeff did with John Peckinham, another thing worth noting is that Jeff had brought up that he had memory issues. He had been injured in a accident prior to Veronica disappearing. I believe like the exact date and his exact age is unknown, but it led to problems with his memory. Susie was also able to verify, speaking with people in the Facebook group, that stated that there had been rumors that it was a motorcycle accident, but that is not the case, and that they believed it was like his junior or senior year of high school when Jeff had been out jogging and he was struck by a car. This individual who had talked about this in the group said that after that, Jeff wasn't the same, and reportedly this issues with his memory were medically confirmed. This is not just a claim that he made. That really complicates things, because something very much worth mentioning is the handling of Jeff's interview. The family, Veronica's family, have very valid concerns over it. So Jeff was interviewed by John Peckinham on September 23rd, 1990, but the interview was not recorded, and it was not actually put into an official police report until several days later. And this was only after that interim chief of police, Kenneth Hahn, had requested for it to be written down. According to Sherrilyn, the interview with Jeff lasted over 24 hours, which is an alarming long time, which the family believe would have been nearly impossible. Not nearly. Let's say what it is. A 24-hour interview is impossible to recount all of those details days later. Yet John Peckinham chose to use words like, "This is an exact description of what Jeff talked to me about."
We could both see Jeff in the middle of being interviewed, especially after how many hours was it? 24 hours of being questioned, that he just said flippantly, "Well, maybe I did do something." The way they quote him is, it's not showing any inflection as to how he said it. It's just typed out words. We've all seen people on TV break in interviews, and they just sound like they're totally ridiculous in the crap that comes out of their mouth as to what their alibis are and stuff like that. And it's just like, okay, he could have said some of the things that they say he said, but I don't think he said them as a matter of fact. This is absurd. Out of exasperation, he just said, "Oh yeah, sure, this is what I did." It's a smart ass remark. I'm not saying he didn't say any of it, because they all seem to kind of type it down pretty accurately, almost identically to each other, which is also kind of circumspect, because nobody has recall that's that close to identical. But he could have said some of the things he said, but it's all not being done right at the time of the interview. It's them writing stuff down days after the interview and what their memory of the interview was. It wasn't somebody sitting in there taping it and typing what he said down. It was all recollection interview notes.
I've tried to understand why. Like I said, would that not be the number one person that you would want to talk to and ensure that you had as much detail? Even if you didn't have a recording device available, if that was being used up by somebody else, why are you not pen to paper getting every piece of information? Especially since Jeff has these well-known, documented memory issues where you're kind of you are needing those details right then and there to ensure as much of accuracy as you possibly can get. John also stated in the police report that the whole time Jeff and I talked, even while Detective Blake and Sheriff Bivens were present, Jeff was very soft-spoken, and only once did he break down and cry. This was during his conversation with me when he was telling me why he might have had something to do with Veronica being missing or dead. Now, this is something Jeff apparently had also said to others as well. And through the years, people have pointed out like there has been some odd behaviors from Jeff. For example, and I just kind of want to start with the ones that I think, looking at the bigger picture here, more have to do with what people have described as his like quote unquote quirky personality. So after Veronica disappeared, Jeff bought the same vehicle as Veronica had and changed his license plate to kind of like mimic her license plate, which was like a vanity plate. I believe hers was like her initials and date of birth, and then his was his initials and date of birth. So almost to like, I don't know. To me, I'm like, that doesn't seem suspicious. That kind of seems like you're wanting to be close, like closer and similar and think about and honor. I don't know. Another thing that was mentioned, he would show up at the Blumhorst home. He would stay for days at a time, sleeping on the couch, even like answering phone calls. He also had demanded the police hold a press conference which people were just like, okay, are you going to like too hard? He made a public plea on the local radio station and even read a letter that he'd written for Veronica and dedicated a song to her. Again, for me, I'm just like, he's been described as an odd guy. Again, like we don't know what like that meant, the mentality was, if he's quirky. These seem like quirky things. I don't know. I will say though, some of the more concerning actions that people have brought up is that Jeff had made several quote unquote confessions to possibly having done something to Veronica, but had no details. Just like theories. And he did often refer to Veronica in the past tense, like right after she went missing. He also specifically asked them to search his family's farm for Veronica, which turned up nothing. And then people thought that it was suspicious that he eventually got a lawyer and stopped speaking with police. For me, I feel like a lot of this is just, I don't know, having not like Susie said, like met or known Jeff, like we don't really know like the extent of like what his personality is. Maybe it is quirky. Maybe it is eccentric. Maybe it is somewhere on, the spectrum. There's so many theories that we can, theorize here. What makes me think that this isn't, it's not as concerning for him go through theories and wonder about like, did I do something, is almost that the fact that he did have memory issues. And I'm just trying to imagine like a 24-hour interview with him when he already knows that he struggles with his memory, and then potentially like without having that audio, like a record of this interview, we don't know like the pressure that was put on him and the things that were being asked. So if it's just like, somebody that hadn't been in an accident with, a brain injury, it sounds like, that can be intimidating in itself. And if he's like really feeling like he wants to help, it's almost like he's being like, yeah, like, I don't know. I don't remember. I want to say no, but it's like, is this one of these things that my brain is just like blocked it off? Like, oh my God, what if I did have something to do with this? But then it's almost like he's just like, please, like, look into it and figure it out. That is just like me outside taking that and then just kind of also bringing myself into like the circumstances of that time and also the injury. Like I keep kind of going back to this injury that he had. So to date, Jeff has never been formally named a suspect or even cleared in Veronica's case. In fact, no charges have been filed against anybody. This really is such a chilling case because it's like, these cases that nightmares are made of. It's like you're leaving like in the middle of the night. You just want to get home. You get home. It's like the routine, shut off the lights, lock everything up, walk to the door. You're at your home. Everyone has that feeling of like safety that you are arriving to, and to be steps away from that, it's chilling. And there's been not a shred of evidence or leads as to what happened. Literally is a case where somebody seemingly has vanished out of thin air. Now, Veronica's younger brother, Todd, had dedicated his whole life to finding his sister. He created a website and a Facebook group to get attention for his sister's case. Now, initially, Todd, he fully believed that Jeff was to blame. Unfortunately, he passed away in 2013. Todd did, after a battle with cancer. However, he had admitted that he wished he hadn't wasted so much time looking at Jeff, towards the end. I will say that it sounds like over the years, it wasn't, just that initial search There have been attempts. There have been various search efforts that were conducted, including the use of cadaver dogs, even like psychics and paranormal investigators. And a lot of these investigations are documented on Todd's website, which you can check out. I will have it linked in the description. Even shortly after Veronica went missing, the family worked with a medium named Greta. Sorry, not Bretta. Is that again? Greta? Greta. Not Greta. Come on, Sherrilyn. Greta Alexander, to try to gain some insight on where to look.
If you're not here, but you are close by, can you make a knock against the tree and we'll follow you? Right there. Perfect. If that's you knocking, can you please make a knock on one of these trees close by? We'll follow the knocks. If it's you, you know the name we're looking for. I don't want to mention it out loud. If you're somewhere in this area, make a knock on these other trees. We'll follow the knocks into the woods. Right here.
Whoever was here was giving John signs. We followed those signs. We found the river with the trees. Can you tell us what we need to look for there? We're here to help and follow what you're giving us. Can you please speak to us and give us a little more information so we can help you?
Someone was here helping us before. We would love to communicate with you again. No. Oh, nice. Thank you. You're welcome.
What the hell was that?
What?
Ooh. And it sounded like it moved this way. We heard a voice in a different part of the trail say, "He hurt me," by a young lady's voice. Was it you that said that?
Back to the cadaver dog. So in September 2012, there were 2 searches that were done using 2 cadaver dogs. The initial site was actually like the previous property of where Jeff's family had lived. There were new owners that were there at the time who gave permission for the search. There was no evidence of human remains, just as, you know, there wasn't in those early days when Jeff was like, yep, check the property. Now, the second location was in a wooded area within Lee County. It was approximately 20 minutes north of Mendota. And at this site, both canines gave 2 distinct alerts for human remains in separate places, and they were several hundred feet apart. The following year, in June 2013, Todd went back with a team of volunteers, and this time there were 3 dogs. I think 2 were nationally certified that hit in one of those areas again. So this is like a year later. Ironically, it is also the spot where there was like heavy paranormal activity during one of the paranormal investigation and searches. What is wrong with me? Searches. Frustratingly, though, you know, you've got this like hope that these hits would turn into a lead. It didn't. There was no evidence found. Now, there are people from the area who believe that, you know, like it's been 35 years with not a single solid lead or like piece of evidence. They feel that Veronica's disappearance potentially has something to do with somebody that was close to the area, potentially literally close to Veronica, and should have been looked at as not even necessarily a person of interest, maybe even possibly a witness. And that was the first lead investigator on Veronica's case, John Peckinham. I think this has to do not only with the fact that he literally lived like right behind Veronica's family home, but there have been rumors. I also kind of want to tread really lightly because a lot of times rumors are not true. There were rumors that Veronica was dating or had dated a married police officer in town. People feel that John fit that description. He was a known womanizer who had more than one affair, allegedly, according to these rumors, in his lifetime. There have also been allegations that he was in the Super Valu around midnight on the night that Veronica had disappeared and was never questioned about this, nor did he note anything about that in his reports, which I feel would be very important. Kind of going back to like a potential witness. Some of the issues involving the investigation were also that on top of not checking the trunk, on top of not recording or, making a report of the interview with Jeff until days later, he also had failed to secure the garage and the surrounding areas, like around the house, which led to multiple people walking through what should have been considered a crime scene. He also did not process the vehicle for evidence. He only looked at the interior of the car and then just had made the conclusion that there was no signs of a struggle. It was actually a full 24 days after her disappearance when somebody from the police department saw Paul, her father, driving Veronica's car to his job at the fire station, which was located right behind the police station, and had approached him and was like, while you're here, let's fingerprint the vehicle. This is almost a month after, man.
They never did secure the garage where the car was at. They let people walk in and out of the garage and everything. And 24 days later, I drove the car to the fire station, which was right behind the police department. And they come over and asked me, they said, "Are you driving Veronica's car?" And I said, "Yes." They said, "I think we ought to fingerprint it." I said, "You're crazy. It's 24 days later. Everybody's been in and out of it. You blew your case, That didn't go over good. Me and the police department went round and round, and I asked them, I said, "Do you have all the county sheriffs around involved with this?" Because it was Bureau County, LaSalle County, and Lee County was all right there in the one little area. They all connected. And they said, "Yeah." And I said, "Do you have the Illinois State Police involved?" They said, "Yes." 6 weeks later, I'm about 30 miles away at a friend, and he said, "Let's go up and have a coffee." So we went up and had coffee, and he introduced me to the waitress and said, "This is the father of the missing girl in Mendota." And I says, "Yes, I am." We got talking. I said, "The Illinois State Police is involved in it." She said, "No, they're not." I said, "Well, how do you know?" She said, "That's my husband's job."
I think, though, one of the most frustrating and botched parts of this investigation was the handling of the DNA. Within the first 3 days after Veronica disappeared, Paul and Betty had given John Pakenham Veronica's hairbrush as well as her bedding to be used in case DNA evidence could be tested against them. They found out that these items were lost. Many believe I'm just saying, the speculation is, well, who's handling this case and kind of dropping the ball? John. I don't know. Regardless of who did it, they did not know that anything was missing. They were not notified until 4 or 5 years after. And it was when they were called by the new lead investigator to say, yeah, so remember all the DNA materials that are apparently supposed to be here? We don't have them. Meaning all of those years, there was nothing with Veronica's DNA. It's like, these types of cases really, really upset me. I get, like human error, but it's like when there's so much, you're just like, okay, first of all, again, goes back to like, there's a fight for chief of police here. And we've made this many errors in one case? How? Now, on top of John never being interviewed, I guess it's like, well, yeah, he was instantly put on as the lead detective, which I would have been like, hey, what? He lived right there. And also, I wish that I was able to like confirm this because it's like he was put on as lead detective, but if he had been at the Super Valu around midnight, you'd assume that he was not on shift. Well, I guess like in the morning by the time Jeff called, yeah, no, that was the next day. He could have been the one on shift. Okay, I think I just talked myself through that. Thanks for joining me for that. Anyways, on top of him not, like making a statement or interview or, potentially having some information on like the last time that he could have seen her, neither were several people in Veronica's life. A very close friend of hers named Tracy told the Vanish podcast that she was not called until 14 years after Veronica's disappearance. And you could see this as like, oh, well, like if this person isn't a suspect, like what's the harm? But really, it is those people who a victim is closest to who lay out all of the pieces of the puzzle. It's like dumping the puzzle pieces when you first get it so that you can put that full picture together. So 14 years later is virtually useless to any potential information that could have seemed insignificant, that friends wouldn't have even remembered all these years later, but it's at that time that something could have been crucial. Does that make sense? I feel like I really thought I was making a point there. No, it does to me, right? It's like, this is why you interview people close to it. This is why you want to get to the closest people of the person you are searching for. Because again, it could just be like the smallest thing said in passing that could have been crucial. Then 14 years later, at that point, it's like people even forgot the sound of their friend's voice, let alone conversations. I don't know.
I've never understood, like I said, why it took so many years for them to call me and to interview me. Nothing obviously was different than I would say today, but why did it take so long for them to call me in for that interview?
So many issues here. And a lot of issues, like frustrations, I get it. I understand how her family is feeling so frustrated with the way that the department handled this case. And before Todd's death, he made it clear he did not think much about the police department and their handling of his sister's case. He said, I have a bad relationship with them, straight up. I have a bad relationship with the way that they handled this case. They've made so many errors early on. At the time that he had said that, he said it had been years since even he had heard anything from them. It truly is Veronica's family that has just been instrumental in keeping her case in the public eye, her name out there, between the website and the Facebook group. They've also done interviews for podcasts. It's so heartbreaking because at this point, with all of these years that have passed, they've come to terms with the likely reality that Veronica is no longer alive. And at this point, their primary goal is that they just want to bring her home. They just want her remains to give her a proper burial. Her father quoted, and said several times, I don't care who did it. If they would just come and tell me where Veronica is, I can go and get her remains and give her a proper burial. I have said, I don't care if this person goes to prison or not. It's not for me to judge. The man upstairs will do the judging on that. Another thing that has been done to keep Veronica's memory alive and, continue hopes of having her name out there and just, reminding people this is not solved, she is not found, we need to bring her home, is that in 2021, a memorial bench was, unveiled in her honor in Strauss Park in Mendota. And this I'm so hopeful for because the FBI did eventually, in more recent years, come on board, get involved. I guess get permission to also help investigate. Oh my God, it took so long to do that. But anyways, with them getting involved, it actually led to Veronica's birth mother being found. So her birth mother, Mary, is found and she was able to meet with Veronica's adoptive parents, the people who raised her, and meet some of Veronica's other family members. One of them who was Veronica's cousin. And she shared that moment with Susie, and it absolutely touched and then broke my heart simultaneously. She said that when Mary, Veronica's birth mom, had walked up, she said her heart broke all over again because she was the spitting image of Veronica, and that they even shared, some of the same mannerisms. And that is so wild to see. I think I've mentioned this on the channel as well. Whenever I go back east to go and visit all of my family, specifically when I go and I visit my dad's brother, they have spent so many years apart. I mean, over 40, 50 years apart, only seeing each other sporadically throughout all of those years. Their mannerisms just genetically are so similar. It's just wild to see. It's also so comforting to be over, with my family out there and then just be like, oh my God. And oftentimes my dad won't be there. So it's not they're picking up or feeding off of each other. It's just I'm to my uncle, I'm oh my God, are you him? What the heck? So this, oh my God, it just touched me because I can totally feel what that moment would have been like. Veronica's cousin also said, she was I finally was also able to get, like this visual, like this picture of what Veronica would look like as somebody like closer, like to my older age now. Like you're aging, right? And you're thinking about this person that you love so much, that you were close to, and they'll forever be that 21, and you would wonder, right, what they look like. And so for her, it was like, oh my gosh, like now I'm able to kind of like have something to place that image to. She also said that it felt so good to have that moment to tell Veronica's birth mom that Veronica thought about her and wondered about her so much, and to let her know also like that Veronica wasn't mad about like, being quote unquote given up, and that she was hopeful that one day she would have, been able to thank her for giving her such a wonderful family and making that decision. And like my nose is tingling right now because it's like, I can only imagine how healing that moment would have been for everybody, Veronica's family, for having like some of those questions of like, what could have been, what could she have looked like? But then also her birth mother, who it would be so natural and understanding to, wonder like, what would have been like, or was she upset? Like, should I have done, like you kind of like would wrestle with this decision, that you made. And I can't even imagine like how like healing that would have been to hear directly, like from her family that would have known her best, to have been like, she thought of you, she loved you, and she was thankful for you. Like, oh my God, I can't think about it. Yeah, it just continues to get more emotional. We're going to make it through. Okay. So on that day, going back to this, I know I thank you guys for staying with me. We're almost done. I love you. On the day that the bench for Veronica was, unveiled, another bench was also dedicated on the same day, and it was in honor of her brother Todd and all of the efforts, like his life efforts to fight to bring his sister home. And obviously, he had passed, and it was like this, I can't even imagine. I'm just like, we're gonna break down, Sherrilyn. Both of them were honored that day. Oh my gosh. This case seriously just, it has my head spinning with theories, but it's also just like so frustrating because I don't like to be like an over like theorizer, because I don't like to like just like toss out accusations and stuff like that. But I do get the feeling, because of like all of these multiple missteps early on in the investigation, just like the family said, it's like there's so many mistakes right early on. Like those were crucial days. We're here 35 years later with no answers. I do understand that there are just like cases that are so hard to solve, even if you go like throughout all of the steps correctly from the get-go. It's like when you had this many piling on though that were wrong, this is why we're here, I feel. Now, Susie had mentioned when she got this suggestion for the case that Ricky had a theory that Larry Hall could have had something to do with Veronica's case. And Veronica did fit his victim profile. He traveled a lot throughout those Midwestern towns during the Civil War reenactments from like the 80s and 90s that he did. I did a video on him if you want to check it out. Way too much just to like summarize here. But his primary targets were young, white female, often teens or women in their early 30s, and many of the victims or suspected victims were very petite in stature that he could like quickly overpower. Now, at one point, Hall admitted to over 35 murders. He did retract like each confession. Super frustrating guy. Oh my God. I literally kind of blocked that case out because I was just like, yeah, I was like all coming back, like such a piece of work. Authorities do suspect that he was responsible for like 40 to 50 unsolved disappearances of young women though. Like I said, he also targeted young women. They were alone, usually in isolated areas, and would either like lure them or ambush them to get into his van. They were then typically restrained, essayed, strangled, and often the bodies were disposed in like remote areas to minimize evidence. There's also several suspected victims whose remains have never been found. And one of those victims has alarming similarities to Veronica. Her name was Lori Deppies, and she vanished from her workplace parking lot in 1992. So 2 years after Veronica, friends found her locked car with her belongings inside, but no trace of Lori. Just like one of those eerie things of it's just like you got to this like point of safety and vanished. The only thing I kind of go back to is, there were early on the search dogs that traced Veronica's scent to, the nearby alley, and then the trail ended, suggesting, that she had left in another vehicle. But then it goes back to not only investigators, but people in Veronica's life just could not see her willingly getting into a vehicle with somebody unless it was somebody that she knew or trusted. And that if it wasn't, then this individual would have like gotten out and there would have been like some sign of a struggle to like pull her in, but there wasn't. You kind of have to think about the fact that like all of her belongings like would have been what like she was grabbing to go into the house. And so if someone was grabbing you, like you would have dropped those. It's not like you would have like held on to everything and then like walked over into the alley and got into a vehicle. Do you know what I'm saying? And that kind of like sounds more how Larry would have ambushed his victims, but there was just like everything was missing along with her and there was no signs of a struggle, which totally, yeah, it does make sense that she would have gotten in with somebody she knew. So because of that, I guess that's like, you know, like one of the only things that I feel like, I'm like, I don't know if it was Larry. But there's so many overlaps in circumstances. There's obviously some compelling theories to tie them all together, but I don't know. I do think that it more aligns to somebody close to Veronica. I think though, I understand like why people would think that. I mean, obviously Ricky's not the only one and it makes sense like to like even toss that out there. I mean, here we are 35 years later, unsolved. Like it's clearly not going to harm an investigation to be curious to even like see like, okay, like let's look at all of this as to why it isn't. It kind of lets you like come up with like, it opens up like other ideas and theories that you can consider to actually help solve the case, if that makes any sense. So like I said, I'm hopeful because the FBI has been investigating since 2020. I think that the amount of time to have them get involved was beyond too long. I personally feel like the local police department should have called in help years and years ago, but what's done is done. And I hope that, you know, for her family, this can lead to answers and finally bring her home because 35 years, like that's almost as long as I've been alive. Like I just, oh my God, my heart breaks just thinking about it. And I think it's also just like the uneasiness of not even like a shred of anything to hold on to, you know? So I'm hopeful now that the FBI have gotten involved. If you have any information on the disappearance of Veronica Blumhorst, please call the FBI at 1-800-225-5324, or you can submit a tip online at tips.fbi.gov. She was last seen wearing her work clothes, which was corduroy pants, a green sweater over a tank top, brown shoes, purple satin jacket, and her class ring and watch. I'm so curious to hear your guys' thoughts. Again, I feel like I don't even have to like, you know, you guys all know. Let's have respectful conversation and theories. I always know like who's not a Sip and Dale, like who just like randomly found the video with like, you know, disrespect theories and stuff like that, or like kind of like useless comments. And I'm just like, oh, you're new. So those who aren't new, I'd love to hear the respectful theories. I do think that there is benefit to that, and just kind of like we all think so differently, and that is like one thing that I appreciate so much is like seeing different perspectives, which is why I think that it wouldn't be harmful to kind of like look at an angle like Larry Hall to be like, okay, well, why isn't it this, and what are we like so sure that it isn't, and then like follow that more. Do you know what I mean? Like being like, okay, well, if it is somebody like personal, then like going back to that drawing board specifically, because it's like everything is like leading you back there. Let's dissect that more. I don't know. I'm so curious. This again is so frustrating because it's like one of these cases where because of the lack of evidence or leads like at the very, very beginning, usually I've been banking on these unsolved cases for something to come back with DNA after all these years, like as we progress in that department. And it's been helpful for so many families. And in this one, it's like, it really is like going back to square one and like good old boots on the ground detective work, but like 35 years is, oh my God, like that's ancient. That's centuries, I feel like, when it comes to a case. They say like, you know, like at those 48 hours are crucial. We're like almost there in years. I don't know. Anyways, it doesn't hurt to, I feel like, productively have a conversation. Keep her name out there, you know, like talk about it. It's like, had it not been for Susie, I would have never known about Veronica's case. And now I know it's definitely going to be one that I'm just like constantly going to go back to and want to revisit and theorize and think of different things because it's been so long, right? I don't know. I'm very curious to hear your thoughts is what I'm trying to say. Thank you for staying with me today. I feel like this was like harder than usual, you guys. I'm all over the place. I feel like you can also tell when like a case has had me like spiraling because I'm like this. I'm like, what are we trying to say? I don't know. But you know who does know? You guys know better than me most times. And I do appreciate that so much. And thank you for coming back. This is where I will leave you today. You've been through enough. okay? And I appreciate you. I will see you in the next video. I will miss you terribly until then. Make sure to love each other, love yourself, and I will see you soon. And also, I forgot to say, don't forget to subscribe and turn on your notifications. Now, I do feel like maybe sometimes they're working more. I don't know. The subscription really, really helps. So it helps to, you know, subject more people to this, okay? I love you. I'll see you soon. Bye.